Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Charlie McGraw left the noise of civilization behind for a quiet life in the Sierra Nevadas, he never expected war. But when drones appear, flags are planted, and strangers knock with fake authority, Charlie doesn't back down. He loads up. Some lines aren't just drawn, they're defended. My name is Charlie McGraw. I'm 43 years old, a retired ranger, and not exactly a people person. After spending 2 decades wrangling tourists, tracking poachers, and listening to bureaucrats argue about trees they've never seen, I decided I'd had enough of civilization. So I packed up my gear, sold my place in Fresno, and bought myself a 12-acre slice of freedom up in the Sierra Nevadas. Real land, real trees, real silence. No leaf blowers, no homeowners associations, and no one knocking on my door with a clipboard and a forced smile. The place was a fixer-upper, no doubt about that. The cabin had a slight lean to it. The porch creaked like an old man's knees, and the only heat source was a cast iron wood stove that hadn't seen action since the Reagan administration. But to me, it was paradise. I spent the first few weeks cutting dead branches, setting up solar, and coaxing the well pump into something resembling functionality. Banjo, my German shepherd, loved the space. He'd go tearing through the woods like a pup, barking at chipmunks like they owed him rent. At night, I'd sit on the porch with a beer and listen to the wind move through the trees. No sirens, no headlights, just pine and stars. It was good. Too good in hindsight. I first noticed something was off when Banjo started growling at the sky. I looked up and saw a drone, a shiny white quadcopter humming above my tree line like a lazy wasp. It hovered for a minute, then zipped off toward the south ridge. Weird, but not worth losing sleep over. Maybe a hiker, I figured. The next day, another drone. This time, closer, lower. Banjo chased it halfway across the clearing before it buzzed off like it was on recon. A few days later, I found a set of small orange flags staked along the access road, perfect little triangles poking out of the gravel, spaced every 10 feet. I followed them with my eyes, and sure enough, they curved right up toward my mailbox, like someone was planning to pave a welcome mat right through my pine trees. I pulled up every damn flag and tossed them in the shed. Then the hikers started showing up. Or so I thought. 2 guys in khakis and polos parked near the edge of my property, snapped photos with long lenses, then left without so much as a wave. Another time, a couple in matching Patagonia gear stood outside my driveway, arguing quietly while gesturing at my generator. This wasn't tourism, this was surveying. And I don't like being surveyed. The kicker came in a nice manila envelope, stuck to my gate with blue painter's tape. It had the friendly but smug logo of Summit Pines HOA in the corner, along with a note that began, "Dear Adjacent Property Resident." It went on to explain that due to regional ecological oversight efforts, my land had been selected for voluntary participation in a routine property integrity and environmental alignment inspection. It ended with a proposed date for the inspection and an invitation to call President Karen Shaw with any questions. I didn't call. I wrote a letter, a firm one. I cited state property codes, included copies of my deed, my parcel number, and a notarized affidavit stating I was not, never had been, and never would be a member of their HOA. I mailed 1 copy to Summit Pines, another to the county recorder's office, and a third to the Placer County Sheriff's Department with a short note. For the record, in case things get stupid. That should have been the end of it. But in my experience, when someone sends you a letter taped to your gate, they're not asking, they're warning. The next morning, I was up early, standing with a mug of black coffee and watching the tree line like it might blink first. The air was sharp, cold enough to bite through the flannel, and Banjo was already on alert, his ears perked toward the gravel road that twisted through the pines like a lazy snake. Nothing moved, but I knew that wouldn't last. By mid-morning, I was walking the property line with a clipboard in one hand and a bright yellow can of marking paint in the other. I'd called in a favor from a buddy I used to work with in forestry, Benji, a certified land surveyor with a grudge against bureaucracy even bigger than mine. He showed up in a battered Dodge with a GPS rod and a thermos of whiskey coffee, and we spent the better part of the day reconfirming every inch of my border. Turns out I was right. Those orange flags I'd pulled, they weren't random. The HOA markers were staked 4 feet inside my actual boundary. Benji squatted next to one of them, spat, and muttered, "That's not a mistake." That's a land grab. We marked every incursion in red and took photos, close-ups, GPS logs, time-stamped like a paranoid doomsday prepper's scrapbook. By the time we finished, I had a folder thick enough to slap a judge awake. Benji wished me luck, reminded me to keep the Mossberg oiled, and disappeared down the road like a ghost in hiking boots. That evening, just after dusk, another drone showed up. This one was slicker, quieter, with a high-res light and a strobing red beacon underneath. It hovered outside my second-story window like it was casing the joint. Banjo lost his mind. I stepped out onto the porch with my shotgun in one hand and a tactical flashlight in the other. I didn't fire. I'm not reckless, but I lit that thing up with 25,000 lumens right in its plastic eye. It twitched, zipped backward like a startled insect, then buzzed off toward the Summit Pines Ridge. I stood there for a while, listening to the hum fade, then went inside and pulled every curtain shut. The next morning, a new envelope was waiting on my gate. Same logo. This time, it was less friendly. It stated, in formal, almost smug language, that, due to our failure to respond constructively to the HOA's prior outreach, a mandatory preliminary site visit was now scheduled for the following Tuesday at 9 a.m. sharp. No more voluntary, no more soft language. They were coming. I called the number at the bottom of the letter. A clipped female voice answered, Summit Pines Association. "This is Charlie McGraw," I said. "You sent someone to my gate again." A long pause. "Yes, Mr. McGraw. President Shaw has authorized an environmental and safety inspection of your property as permitted under the expanded HOA zone policy." "I'm not part of your HOA." "Yes, we're aware. However, Summit Pines is in discussions with the county regarding the inclusion of adjacent parcels for environmental compliance. It's in everyone's best interest." I gritted my teeth. "If you or anyone from your group sets foot on my land, they'll be trespassing." There was a pause. "Mr. McGraw, we understand your concern, but I'd advise you to cooperate. You don't want to appear combative." "You want combative," I said calmly. "Then come by. Bring a clipboard. Bring a priest." I hung up and opened a new folder on my desktop labeled HOA Bullshit, Phase 2. Then I started drafting a cease and desist letter. 3 copies, one to the HOA, one to the sheriff, and one to my lawyer cousin down in Sacramento who owed me more favors than he liked to admit. By Friday, I had surveillance signs up, batteries charged, and a 6-pack chilling in the creek. I wasn't going looking for trouble, but if trouble wanted to hike up my mountain and knock on my front door, well, then I'd answer. Tuesday morning came with a silence that felt too deliberate, the kind that presses into your ears like altitude. Banjo was already pacing the porch, nose twitching, tail stiff. I was inside sharpening my axe, not because I planned to use it, but because it helped me focus. There was a calm that comes with the rhythm of steel on stone. That, and I wanted the edge sharp in case I had to split some metaphorical bullshit in half before noon. At 8:40, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel, a heavy vehicle, too heavy for tourists. I stepped out onto the porch and saw them coming up the trail like a pack of scavengers that mistook the mountain for carrion. A matte gray SUV with Summit Pines HOA printed on the door in obnoxiously neat lettering. Behind it, a pickup with what looked like a pair of private security goons riding up front. Black shirts, black pants, the kind of guys who took weekend classes in tactical posture. When the car stopped, they didn't hesitate. They got out like they'd done this before. First came Karen, the woman herself, clad in a fleece vest embroidered with the HOA crest like it meant something. Her hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail, lips pursed into a permanent frown of disapproval. She was followed by a tall man with a clipboard and a laminated badge around his neck that read Environmental Officer. Last came the 2 guards, one holding a walkie-talkie like it was a weapon, the other already eyeing my porch like he wanted to. Redecorate it with his face. Karen walked like she owned the ridge, not just the land, but the damn air. "Good morning," she said, not smiling. "We're here for the inspection, as scheduled." I didn't move. I was leaning against the door frame, holding my Mossberg across my chest, not pointed, not aimed, just there, visible, present, like an exclamation mark on the end of a boundary line. "I sent you 3 written refusals," I said. "You're trespassing." Karen gave a tight, performative sigh. "Mr. McGraw, we've informed the county of your refusal to comply. This visit is to document any hazards that might endanger the broader community." "There is no community here," I said. Just me, the dog, and whatever raccoon keeps stealing from my compost bin. The environmental officer stepped forward and began snapping photos of the generator, of the propane tank, of the stack of firewood by my wall. One of the guards was poking around my shed door, testing the handle like he expected it to open with entitlement alone. Banjo was barking his lungs out, teeth bared. I said back off, I repeated, louder this time. Karen turned, waving a hand toward the man at the shed. Just routine, Mr. McGraw. We've received complaints about improper fuel storage and visual pollution. That means we're within our rights to... I stepped off the porch. That got their attention. 3 things happened at once. The environmental officer froze mid-snapshot. One of the guards reached under his vest like he was weighing his options. And Karen took one look at me coming down the steps, shotgun in hand, jaw tight with barely restrained fury, and flinched. You've got 3 seconds, I said, my voice dead calm. To leave my land. 1. The guard by the shed backed off so fast he nearly tripped over his own tactical boot. 2. Karen raised both hands, eyes wide. This is an official assessment. 3. That's when they broke. The officer bolted for the SUV so fast he dropped his tablet. One guard followed, the other slipped on the gravel and went down hard, cussing the whole way. Karen stood frozen for 1 more second, just long enough for me to cock the pump on the Mossberg. Nice and slow. Not loaded, but she didn't know that. She turned and sprinted. I didn't chase them. I didn't say a word. I just stood in the driveway with my boots planted in the dirt and watched them peel out like the last train from a bad idea. Banjo growled and chased the dust cloud for a few feet, then trotted back to sit beside me like a proud deputy. I walked over to where the environmental officer had dropped his tablet. It was still recording. The screen showed a trembling, slightly crooked view of my porch, the firewood, the edge of the trees. I picked it up and carried it back inside, dropped it on the kitchen table like a forgotten casserole dish, and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. Then I rewound the video and hit save to local. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. Unknown number, but I didn't have to guess. Mr. McGraw, said a shrill voice that barely masked its panic. This is Karen Shaw. I'm informing you that we're reporting you to the authorities for threatening behavior with a deadly weapon. You've obstructed an official safety inspection. Karen, I said, you brought armed men onto private land, tried to break into my shed, and ignored 3 legal notices. This will be handled by the sheriff, she snapped, and possibly higher. I hung up. Then I called the sheriff myself. They showed up just past noon. 2 patrol vehicles kicked up a trail of dust on my access road, one marked, one unmarked. I stood at the edge of the porch with Banjo lying calmly beside me, head resting on his paws like this was just another lazy Tuesday. I'd already laid out everything they might ask for. 3 printed copies of my deed, aerial photos of the property line, time-stamped surveillance screenshots, and the cease and desist letters I'd mailed last week. The first officer out of the marked car was Deputy Harris, a barrel-chested guy with a mustache that said he didn't like writing reports unless someone was bleeding. The second, from the unmarked unit, was Sergeant Kwan, sharp, polite, eyes like a hawk. As they approached, I could see they were doing that silent cop dance, half suspicious, half exhausted. Mr. McGraw, Harris called. Mind if we have a word? Not at all, I said. Coffee's hot. I'd offer some, but I imagine you've got a policy against caffeine diplomacy. They smirked, but didn't laugh. Not yet. We got a call, Kwan said. Report of a firearm being brandished during a civil inspection. Your name came up. Let me guess, I said. Karen Shaw, Summit Pines HOA. Both nodded. She failed to mention that she entered my property without permission, brought 2 private security clowns, tried to force open my shed, and ran off when I told them to leave. Were you armed? Harris asked. Legally, visibly, and without a round in the chamber, I said, handing over a printed screenshot of my outdoor camera feed. That's me. That's the Mossberg. That's them halfway through my side yard. Kwan took the image, studied it. You got the footage? I held up a flash drive. From 3 angles. Interior cam caught audio too. Also, here's my parcel deed. No HOA affiliation. Fully recorded. Here's the notice I sent them last week, saying not to come. And here's the tablet one of their boys dropped while trespassing. Kwan accepted the pile like I'd handed him a court case, gift wrapped in manila. Harris muttered, hell of a morning. They parked their SUV right on my survey markers, I added. Left tread marks over my tulip bulbs. Not that I'm sentimental. Kwan glanced at the flash drive again. Mind if we step inside and view this? I led them into the cabin. It wasn't big, but it was clean. Tools neatly racked, wood stove burning slow, maps pinned to the wall like scars. I set the flash drive into my laptop and let the video play. It spoke for itself. Karen demanding entry. The so-called inspector photographing my generator, one of the guards trying to jiggle the shed lock. Then me, calm, direct, issuing a clear warning and counting down like a man who'd done this professionally before. The video ended with them fleeing like someone had set fire to their board meeting. When it was over, both deputies sat in silence for a beat. Then Harris sighed. Well, that's clear. You didn't point the weapon at anyone, Quan noted. Didn't threaten bodily harm. You gave them time to leave. I wasn't about to start a shootout over HOA politics, I said, but I also wasn't about to let strangers stomp across my land like they'd annexed it. Quan leaned back in his chair. Technically, brandishing laws vary, but in this case, you didn't cross the line. You were on your own property dealing with uninvited guests who ignored a written no-entry order. Plus, Harris added, the minute they crossed your marked property line, it became trespassing. You've documented everything. If anything, they opened themselves up to a civil suit. They already threatened me with one, I said. Karen called not 20 minutes after they ran off, swearing she'd take this to the highest level, whatever that means to people who think lawn color is a felony. They stayed another 30 minutes, took a formal statement, and photographed the damaged shed latch and the tire ruts. Harris radioed dispatch to log the incident, and Quan took the flash drive as evidence. If HOA follows through with a complaint, he said, this record protects you. But just in case, I recommend locking your gate and posting another round of no trespassing signs. I've got some on order already, I said. Reflective ones, with sarcasm. That finally got a chuckle from both. Before leaving, Quan turned at the door. Mr. McGraw, you've handled this by the book, but something tells me they're not done. I know, I said. But neither am I. As the patrol cars rolled back down the trail, Banjo let out a low huff and rested his chin back on his paws. I stepped off the porch and looked at the crushed marker stakes, the splintered gravel, the shed door that still hung open by a broken latch. War had been declared, but at least now I had the law on the record. I didn't hear from them for 2 days. Not a peep, not a drone, not a jeep with a smiling moron in Oakleys and a clipboard. It was the kind of silence that felt bought, like the kind you get when a storm's backing up behind the mountain and the birds shut up in anticipation. And, sure enough, on the third day, I got the email. Subject line, Summit Pines HOA versus Charles McGraw, formal legal action notice. It came from a firm in Sacramento that sounded like it billed by the syllable. Attached were PDFs packed with all the subtlety of a war drum, accusations of brandishing a deadly weapon, unlawful seizure of HOA property, read the tablet and drone I never invited, and, my favorite, claims of psychological trauma inflicted upon their inspection team. They used words like hostile standoff, militant posture, and potential domestic extremist tendencies. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee, but they weren't done. That same day, residents of Summit Pines started getting hand-delivered letters, complete with HOA letterhead, warning them about a dangerous, heavily armed individual living adjacent to community boundaries. They accused me of non-compliant environmental behavior, whatever that meant, and said I posed a significant liability to long-term property values. Someone even started a Facebook group called Neighbors for Safe Summit. The banner image, a blurry freeze frame of me holding the shotgun pulled straight from that environmental officer's dropped tablet. It got worse. By Friday, I had a visit from a county code enforcement officer. Friendly enough guy, but confused as hell. He was following up on an anonymous tip about hazardous fuel storage, improper septic handling, and possibly unlicensed firearm usage on a mixed-zoned parcel. He'd brought paperwork and a yellow vest that looked like it had never seen dirt. I showed him around. My generator was in perfect condition. My septic was state-approved and regularly pumped. And as for the firearms, locked, registered, and kept cleaner than most people's cars, I said, handing him my paperwork. He whistled through his teeth. This is tighter than the sheriff's own cabin. Before he left, I asked him if he could confirm who filed the complaint. He shrugged. Can't say officially, but the language sounds HOA-ish. They're getting pushy lately. That's when I knew this wasn't just pettiness. It was a campaign, a pressure cooker, a coordinated effort to either force me to surrender or bait me into an actual legal misstep. And I wasn't about to give them either. So I hit back. I called in Dina Romero, a no-nonsense property rights attorney based in Auburn. Dina had made a name for herself tearing apart overreaching local agencies and abusive HOAs. She was short, sharp-tongued, and had once won a countersuit against a city that tried to condemn a gun range to build a yoga retreat. We met at my place that Sunday. She stepped out of her Subaru in hiking boots and a leather jacket, looked around the ridge, and said, "Charming. I can smell the HOA stink from here." I handed her the entire pile, the drone footage, the cease and desist documents, the video of the confrontation, the legal threats, the screenshots from Facebook, and the code enforcement report. She flipped through them like a wolf going through a steak catalog. They're sloppy, emotional, trying to provoke, perfect. She drafted a countersuit within 72 hours. It included civil trespassing, attempted unlawful zoning manipulation, harassment and defamation, malicious reporting to local authorities, emotional distress, and reputational damage. And the kicker, intentional interference with peaceful enjoyment of property. Oh, and we threw in a formal complaint to the county about illegal territorial expansion attempts by a private organization. I had enough GPS data and marked up maps to make a damn cartographer weep. The next move was strategic. We leaked the story. Dana called in a favor with a local reporter from the Placer County Press. The guy loved the angle, a quiet veteran homesteader being targeted by an HOA hell-bent on expanding their power. They ran the piece under the headline, Mountain Man versus HOA, the battle for Sierra Land. By Tuesday, the piece had gone viral. I had people from 3 counties emailing me their own HOA horror stories. A veterans group offered legal support. A state rep even reached out asking if I'd be willing to testify about HOA overreach at a policy review hearing next season. But the best part? Karen went quiet. The Facebook group stopped posting. The HOA's website went into maintenance mode. And that's when I knew they'd fired their first volley. But they hadn't counted on me returning it with a lawyer, a newspaper, and a 12-gauge sense of humor. The silence didn't last long. Karen and her HOA crew had gone underground, but snakes don't disappear. They just burrow deeper. And sure enough, less than a week after the article hit, I noticed new markers showing up on the edge of my southern boundary. Small, bright orange survey flags, different from the last batch. These had tags from a private surveying firm out of Roseville, contracted no doubt by someone with too much money and too little sense of jurisdiction. I called the firm directly. Got a nervous junior project manager who stammered through phrases like, "We were under the impression the parcel was under reassessment," and instructions came from Summit Pines Community Initiative. No one by that name existed on the official HOA. Paperwork, but it didn't take a genius to guess it was a shell they'd slapped together to justify their creeping lines. Dina went ballistic. "They're not just poking," she growled over the phone. "They're setting up for a hostile jurisdiction claim, slow and steady, planting flags, pretending it's legit, then filing a quiet petition to the county for annexation. It's HOA colonialism." I'd heard of that kind of thing. Some boards tried it with outlying properties, slipping paperwork through sleepy planning departments, or getting land reclassified during map revisions. If left unchecked, it could become a bureaucratic cancer. I drove straight to the county assessor's office with every document I had. The clerk on duty was an old-timer named Mel. Looked like he'd been stapling zoning packets since Nixon. I laid out the whole mess. Parcel numbers, survey photos, drone footage, the flags. Mel took one look, then leaned back and rubbed his jaw. "No one has the right to reassess your land without your request or legal order." And I sure as hell didn't see one cross my desk. He made some calls, pulled up logs. Sure enough, a reassessment inquiry had been filed under a community environmental compliance effort. It listed my land, by number, as pending review. But the kicker, it was signed not by the county, but by a liaison officer from Summit Pines' so-called initiative. Not a government agent, not even a licensed land surveyor. "This is garbage," Mel muttered. "They tried to fake a classification form. I'm flagging this and sending it upstairs." Within 48 hours, the assessor's office issued a formal letter of clarification stating that my land remained entirely autonomous and unaffected by any HOA-affiliated jurisdictional activity. We published the letter in the Placer County Press. They ran it right next to a follow-up piece titled Fake Borders and Real Bullets, How One Man Fought Back Against HOA Encroachment. That's when Karen broke again. She went back on the offensive, but this time through the courts. I was served a new civil complaint. This one was thicker, nastier. It alleged that I had illegally confiscated HOA property, again that damn tablet and drone, intentionally endangered community staff, publicly defamed a private citizens organization, caused mental health deterioration in multiple HOA. Employees obstructed lawful environmental monitoring efforts. Dinah took one look and snorted. It's all sizzle, no steak. They're just throwing spaghetti at the wall and praying something sticks. Still, we had to take it seriously. I doubled security, put up motion sensor lights, reinforced the gates, added 2 more cameras. The woods were too quiet again, and after dark, I spotted movement where there shouldn't be any. Flashlights flickering behind the ridge trail, shadows pacing along the lower tree line. Nothing concrete, just the kind of presence you feel before you confirm it. So I started sleeping light. Banjo, too. Then came the vandalism. I woke up one morning to find my mailbox smashed in, torn from the post, and left upside down in the ditch like a corpse in a ditch coat. A week later, I found dog repellent sprayed across my garden fence. Banjo had swollen eyes for 2 days. Dina filed a police report, but unless I caught them in the act, it was just more unprovable suspicion. But they overplayed their hand. 3 nights later, a neighbor 2 miles down the slope called me. He'd seen a white SUV parked at the trailhead, men in black jackets unloading something. Said they looked like government types but moved like cowards. I checked my cams. There it was. 2 figures creeping along the south side at 2:30 in the morning. They stepped past my no trespassing signs, ducked under a fence, and poked around the generator. One held a clipboard, the other had a small bag. I didn't know what they planned to do, but I had the footage. And this time, I had the time, date, and license plate. I handed it all to Deputy Kwan. The next morning, I got a call. We're opening an investigation. You might want to stay sharp, Mr. McGraw. HOA's playing with fire. I looked at Banjo. I've got the extinguisher. The next escalation wasn't loud. It didn't come with lawyers or vandalism or some HOA emissary playing clipboard commando. It came quietly, disguised as paperwork. A county letter, formal on the outside, deceptively harmless, delivered via certified mail. It notified me of an upcoming mandatory compliance inspection for my property, citing recent changes to regional environmental safety zones. I reread it 3 times. It wasn't from the HOA. This time, it was from the county itself. Real department header, real signature. But the language? It had HOA fingerprints all over it. Phrases like unmanaged vegetation risk, civil boundary compliance, community impact profile, bureaucratic nonsense that reeked of HOA speechwriters who'd never stepped in dirt without suede shoes on. I called Dina. She was already on it. This is a backdoor move, she said. They leaned on someone inside county zoning to trigger a compliance clause. It's obscure, old, and almost never used. But it lets them enter land for review if there's a credible report of safety hazards. And let me guess, I muttered. Karen was the credible source. They're trying to get you on something. Anything. If the county finds one regulation out of order, wild growth near a structure, fuel tanks not double contained, whatever, they can fine you or even condemn part of the property. I didn't wait. The next morning, I called an independent forestry safety auditor I knew from back in my ranger days. Guy named Ed Travers. Retired, still sharp, smelled like cedar and diesel. He came up with 2 assistants and ran a full inspection. Trees, brush, drainage, fuel storage, foundation grading. By sundown, he handed me a report that could have been submitted to NASA. Everything in line. Not perfect, but within the parameters of safe rural living. Then I hired a second inspector and a third. I wanted 3 separate documented notarized confirmations that my land was clean. I emailed copies to Dina, to the county office, to the sheriff's department, and, just for flavor, sent one via registered mail to the Summit Pines HOA address. Then I waited. 3 days later, the compliance team showed up. A white county truck. 3 people. 1 actual inspector, 1 clipboard-swinging bureaucrat in slacks and hiking boots that screamed emergency REI run. And, of course, Karen Shaw herself. I stepped out onto the porch just as they were approaching. Banjo at my heel. I had the reports tucked under one arm and a GoPro strapped to my chest, blinking red. "You're trespassing," I said flatly, "unless you're county certified." The inspector introduced herself. Valid badge, real credentials. I handed her the stack of audits. She flipped through them and stopped cold at Ed Travers' name. "Wait, he signed this?" "Personally." She nodded slowly. "He trained me." The clipboard bureaucrat looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. Karen, though, wasn't backing down. "Regardless of outside audits, the HOA has a duty." "You're not county," I snapped. "You are not government. You are not welcome." The inspector cut her off. "Ma'am, please step back. This is an official assessment, not an HOA procedure." Karen turned red, her hands clenched. "He's created an unsafe perimeter. His presence is destabilizing to the community." I pointed to the edge of the ridge. "That's your boundary line. You're destabilized because you've tried 3 different times to erase it. This ain't Monopoly, lady." The inspector walked the perimeter, reviewed the outbuildings, glanced at the posted cameras and the cleared brush zones. She took pictures, measured the spacing between fuel storage and the cabin wall, checked fire extinguishers. In under 20 minutes, she turned to me. "You're clear. There's no hazard present. No further action will be taken." I smiled. "Can I quote you on that?" "You already recorded me," she said, nodding toward the GoPro. "So, yes." Karen was vibrating at this point. "You think this is over?" she hissed. "You embarrassed a lawful body, stole HOA equipment, published libel." "Careful," I said, stepping down off the porch, calm but close. "You're speaking on public land. Don't make threats. The last time you did that, you left in handcuffs." She backed up, muttering something I didn't catch, and stormed toward her car. Before the county team drove off, the inspector turned and said, "You ever think about running for the board? Of something bigger, I mean." "Not unless they let me chair it with a 12-gauge, I said. That got a smirk. When they were gone, I looked out across the land. My land, still standing, still mine. But the war wasn't over yet. Karen had one more move to play. I could feel it. And when she played it, I'd be ready. I thought she'd try something subtle. Maybe another complaint through a backdoor channel or some sleazy rezoning proposal buried in paperwork. But Karen was done playing coy. Her final move came wrapped in arrogance and perfume. It was a summons. Civil court. She was suing me directly for emotional assault, property theft, public defamation, and willful obstruction of environmental oversight. The HOA attached themselves as co-complainants, demanding not just financial damages, but a forced easement through my land for emergency community access. I nearly spit out my coffee reading it. It wasn't just about revenge. It was a land grab dressed up in legalese and sob stories. Dina cracked her knuckles and smiled like a shark smelling blood. "They've just handed us everything we need. Now we bury them." The court date was set for early spring. Small courtroom in Auburn, but the gallery was packed. Locals came, HOA victims, reporters, even the deputy who'd first responded to Karen's 911 stunt. Karen sat flanked by 2 attorneys, all sharp suits and clipped expressions. I sat next to Dina in boots and a clean flannel, freshly printed reports stacked like bricks between us. Karen's side opened with drama. They painted me as a paranoid recluse, a survivalist with anti-social tendencies who refused to harmonize with the needs of a growing community. They showed edited drone footage, quoted my threats minus the context, and even trotted out the poor. Eco-inspector who claimed she had recurring dreams about the shotgun I held. One HOA rep claimed I intimidated a peaceful inspection team with militarized behavior and a wild dog. Banjo would have barked if he knew. Then it was our turn. Dina was surgical. She played the uncut surveillance footage, including Karen and her team trying to open my shed. She read aloud the sheriff's formal apology. She submitted 3 independent environmental audits. And then she handed the judge a notarized statement from the county inspector, the one who'd been present when Karen tried to hijack the last compliance check. The courtroom was silent as the judge read it. Then came the bombshell. We submitted a county assessor's internal memo, obtained via a HOA request, showing that Summit Pines HOA had repeatedly filed false jurisdictional documents in an attempt to redraw zoning lines. The Summit Pines Community Initiative? It was flagged in the system as non-existent and unauthorized. The judge leaned back, eyes hard. This court does not tolerate the abuse of legal systems for personal vendettas or land coercion, he said. The plaintiffs have presented no substantive evidence of damages. In contrast, the defendant has provided overwhelming proof of trespass, defamation, and coordinated harassment. He dismissed every one of their claims. Then, in a turn I hadn't expected, he turned to Dina. "Have you filed for damages?" "We have, Your Honor," she said. "Motions for trespassing, emotional distress, reputational damage, and court costs." Motion granted. The gavel came down. Karen's face drained of color. The final ruling. $240,000 in damages. A permanent restraining order against Karen and any HOA-affiliated personnel setting foot on my property. A court-mandated HOA board audit and disciplinary review, and a formal note entered into Warwick County record affirming that my land was private, exempt from HOA authority, and protected from further claim attempts. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I gave them one quote: "Private land means private. You want a view of the wild? Then respect the people who live in it." Karen lost her presidency within the week. The board replaced her with a 28-year-old real estate lawyer who sent me a certified apology letter. In it, he acknowledged the HOA's overreach and promised no further contact or claim would ever be made on my land. I framed it. Banjo and I returned to the cabin a few days later. The wind was calmer. The air smelled like pine and clean dirt. No drones, no flags, no threats. Just the land, quiet and steady, like it was before all this nonsense started. I hung a new sign at the foot of the driveway. Big, carved into reclaimed oak, stained deep in bold. Private property. No trespassing. Not now. Not ever. HOA free zone. And just beneath it, in smaller letters, "Smile. You're on camera." And yes, it's still loaded.